So these are July 5th statistics. They're saying currently there are over 2 million podcasts worldwide. I mean, that's just a staggering figure. And they said that statistically, over 70% of the American population knows about at least one podcast. I bet it's 65% of that is like Joe Rogan. When we first started, how many podcasts were there? I would love to know what that would be.
Oh, man. I mean, do you remember having to explain to people what a podcast was, clients and stuff? That was early days. Some of the early shows that I listened to back then, their numbers are insanely high right now, 1,500 episodes or something like that, because they've been doing it even that much longer than we have. I mean, we're up to almost 500. That's pretty impressive by most standards.
But in some ways, kind of feel like we've been eclipsed a little bit. Not that I think none of us thought that we would get rich doing this, but certainly we've been doing it for a good long time. And you listen to like Accidental Podcast, and I think they're doing pretty well. And they have a lot of sponsorship reads and a lot of big boy sponsors that they bring to the table. So I think all three of those guys are sitting back and doing pretty well. I don't think we would ever have the reach that they do because we have a niche market of Apple consultants and people in the tech industry. We're very, very narrow casted. And I guess we knew that going into it. In terms of deriving revenue from the podcast, there's not a lot there on the table.
It's hard to stay motivated when I could take another client call or two rather than recording every week. I could take one more client call and make more money doing that than even just doing just the recording. I mean, we're getting other value from it, but the financial benefit is not the main motivator.
Yeah, I mean, we all put time into it. I mean, Sam does the show notes. Joe, you're doing a lot of the managerial work. Sam does a lot of the correspondence back and forth. And it's staggering the amount of time I put into editing. And this isn't like, I'm not saying like, oh, I do the most. To get a clean show and to really tighten it up and maybe have something that's really listenable for our listeners. For every hour that we do, I would say with no exaggeration, it's a 3-hour job.
I wouldn't even hesitate to say that you do the most with that. I mean, editing is such a massive undertaking that to make us and the guests sound good and take away my ums and ahs and all that stuff, to the point of what we're talking about is just, Joe, you hit it spot on of just saying, well, okay, I can spend this hour or maybe two helping out a client, but we do derive a lot from this, just speaking to each other on its own, right? I mean, like we enjoy the conversation that we have with each other. Thankfully, we like each other. And to go from that is a good thing. And I love it. And I love hearing from people. And then sometimes I feel like, hey, it's crickets out there.
Yeah.
What's going on? And I'm wondering if we are having the reach that I think we have at times. And I know we are narrowcasted, as Jerry mentioned, but still you kind of anticipate some more chatter or response or something on that end that I don't see all the time.
Well, Joe will bear this out. We've got sizable numbers on a weekly basis for our downloads. So we know there's people out there and there's people that are listening. They may just download it and not listen to it. That's possible too.
They might just download it and look at the bits, in the file and just close it and move on.
Read Sam's notes and move on.
If you bring up Accidental Tech Podcast, it's probably a good comparison. I mean, they're in a similar market in the sense that it's Apple, but they're in a completely different kind of, like they're preaching to a different audience. I mean, you might look at it like they're providing a little value to a lot of people. I think we're providing a fair amount of value to many fewer people, than their general interest audience. I mean, we're talking about more niche topics that probably are very interesting to very few people. Like to the people they're interesting to, I think it probably provides a decent value. Like to the patrons that are subscribing to us, I think they're putting their money where their mouth is. And that's a vote of confidence. I mean, those people are encouraging us to do this every week. To a large degree, that's who we're doing it for. There's obviously a much smaller overall audience that we're addressing. So I think like the appeal is to try to get more people to become part of that supporting audience, the patrons who are giving us money every month, to encourage us to keep doing this. Because looking back at 9 years, it's been a lot. Yeah. I like doing it, but it's just, it's a lot.
It's a big undertaking. I think about this sometimes. I'm like, I can't be the only one. The amount of information I've gathered from talking to people on this show, the impact that it has had on transitioning my business to what it is today. It's huge. I'm thankful that we're on this show together, that this happened, because I took MSP into the mix. I learned about all these different vendors to work with. And we talked recently with some people like Richard Wingfield and Tim Pearson. It's huge. And I can't imagine that it's not having that same kind of impact on many others out there that listen.
The two shows you mentioned, a lot of people have talked about the Tim Pearson show and the kind of value they're getting from just him presenting his plans. Present company, Jerry, is making a lot of changes to his business based on Tim's plans. If people just realized what we were talking about in the Patreon, more people might sign up if they knew what they're missing.
And we made that a Patreon show. That was actually the first week of July. And in the second week of July, we had Richard Wingfield on, who's been on the show before, but he talks very candidly about his business Go Bites. There's a lot of value there. And these are Patreon shows. And of course, last week we had the Mac Admins Foundation, the presentation of telling the larger community exactly what that's all about. And, very, very valuable stuff. And that, of course, was a public show. And tonight's a public show. But what we all do, if you're listening to the show, is being involved in tech. It's a moving target. It's constantly changing. It's constantly evolving. And you can't be the same technician or the same consultant or the same MSP provider that you were 5 years ago, because it changes so rapidly. And so probably that's the thing that's kind of kept us motivated and interested all this time, is because it does change and does evolve so quickly. Suffice to say that everybody's probably got a lot of information through the years.
What the Patreon shows do is give us a platform to talk a little bit more candidly, as I've said. Here's one from June, Mistakes and Adventures in Billing. This is where I talked about the mistake of my billing system, how I remedied that. I wouldn't say that publicly, but I would talk about that to our colleagues, because many of us have been there, made a mistake, and you make a mistake and you think you're the only one that's ever made this mistake. And how the F am I going to fix this and make this right? This makes me look bad. I can't believe this happened, and you're just like, what do I do? Maybe it helps someone listen to, number one, like me commiserate about how I messed up. And number two, some ideas about how to fix it and how it went over. There's some value to hearing that, There's another one, this client that's been completely wasting a ton of time over the past few weeks, jumped on a recording because I was just like livid with this client. And I just needed to talk to somebody. And I thought maybe we'll make some lemonade from these lemons here, share a little bit about this with the public. So that was my problematic client story that's behind the paywall, because again, I'm not talking about this stuff publicly.
And that's coming up, of course. That's a future show that we're going to be releasing after this one. So that's something to tune in for, because you weren't raging, but we really unpacked what it was like to work with a client who was completely unreasonable. So it was helpful for me to just work through that with you.
If you people are listening to this public show, I mean, first of all, we really do appreciate everybody listening after all these years, but we'd really, really appreciate some more financial support. If you like the content on the public show, one way you can encourage that and can make that continue is by supporting us also through Patreon. Not only do you support public show and the people that are listening to the public show, but you're also getting special behind the scenes content. If you're out there and you're listening,
where do they go, Joe? I want to support you. Where do I go?
Go to commandcontrolpower.com and click on support. That's all you have to do. And you can subscribe to us on Patreon. It's not hugely expensive. You can look at it as a business expense.
It's the cost of a Dunkin' Donuts coffee and a donut. I'll cue up the band.
Welcome to Command Control Power, a weekly podcast hosted by 3 certified members of the Apple Consultants Network, drawing from over half a century of combined experience. We talk shop, interview vendors and colleagues, and share what we've learned while operating our technology consulting practices. This is Joe Saponare of SciMac, and my 2 co-hosts are Jerry Zigmont of MacWorks and Sam Valencia of the HCS Technology Group. Hey everybody, it's our 9th anniversary. That's right, we've been recording Command Control Power every week since June 2013. We hope you've enjoyed it. On this special occasion of 9 years running, we're trying a little experiment for the next month or 2. We have a great community of supporters on Patreon, and we really want to show them how much we appreciate their support. So this summer, we're airing new shows every week in the private patron-only subscription. Here on the public show, we'll re-air a classic episode from our catalog of almost 500 episodes, along with the occasional new show. For the freshest content, a peek behind the scenes, and more candid conversation about running our businesses, dealing with clients, fixing tough technical issues, and everything else you love about Command Control Power, we invite you to join us on Patreon so you don't miss any of this great content. Go to commandcontrolpower.com and click support. Pledge monthly, and you can instantly subscribe to the weekly patron-only shows right in your favorite podcast app. Once again, to join us on Patreon and get the latest patron-only episodes, visit commandcontrolpower.com and click support. We hope to see you there, and thanks for listening.
This is some additional Back to the Future information. In an upcoming show, I talk about having a client who is using a free email address to run their business, and that's actually a Patreon show that's coming up. Well, I have some follow-up on it, so we've made some inroads. I went to, and this person didn't have a website. So what I did was I was just like shopping around for a website today, and we've all done that. And I ended up placing them with Bluehost because they have pretty good attractive pricing for hosting a WordPress, and also they would host the domain. And it was rated fairly highly, and I think it was $5 a month from Bluehost. So not a lot of money. The email portion of their business, which was the most important, I placed them with Fastmail out of Australia. I could have put them with Microsoft, but I thought ease of use, it's a little less cumbersome than sometimes I find that clients struggle with that 365 portal, especially if they've got a residential account with Office, and then you're kind of bolting on this business product for the mail, and it gets a little bit confusing. So Fastmail is generally pretty reliable. So that transitioned very well. And what I was really surprised about was I was thinking like, okay, I've got to get all their information, which is on an email plan hosted by Yahoo, this free legacy thing. I had to pump all the email into Fastmail. I was thinking of using MigrationWiz from BitTitan. But sure enough, I never knew this actually existed. I was just poking around in Fastmail. I hadn't been there in a while. And I went to settings, and you have the ability to migrate in mail right from Fastmail, right from in their settings. So you could pull it in from Microsoft. You could pull it in from Gmail. Yahoo is there. So it was great. Probably in the course of 2 hours. Yeah, I moved like 22,000 messages for her, got her contacts in there. Good to go.
So does that work similar to BitTitan, where you have to plug in the parameters of the other carrier, or do you just sign into the other carrier?
You sign into the other carrier. It does SAML authentication. It says we're good to go, and it just starts the import. Very simple.
Oh, that's actually kind of impressive.
I was very impressed.
I don't have a lot of experience with Fastmail, but in terms of what I might recommend to a smallish organization or an end user that needs a quick changeover, that's a big selling point to not have to use a third-party entity to make that happen.
It all depends on the size of who you're handling. If you had 25 users or even 5 users, it may not be the way you want to go. But like 1 or 2 people in a small business,
I'll say mom and pop, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Exactly.
That's interesting that you mentioned, looking for an alternative to Microsoft, because I had this conversation with a client today that actually, Jerry, you interacted with a while back, who had a really weird. Her email was compromised. We couldn't recover the account no matter what we tried. We got on the phone with Microsoft. We got her on the phone and them. And then they said, well, you guys can't be on the phone. What? We're helping her. She had to continue the conversation with Microsoft, which of course means that it went in a more challenging direction. We can usually smooth that out a little bit. But the fact that they said, well, we don't want to talk to you guys. We want to just talk to the client. Okay. So it just extended this overall thing. But the issue was that she wasn't getting the password reset emails to recover her account. It was showing, what the account that we thought was her Gmail account. It turns out that it wasn't the right account. It turns out that somebody got into her account and changed the recovery address to something similar enough where it looked like the same spelling as, what her original recovery address was, but it was a different account. Someone else figured this out because she, I guess, was talking to a friend one day, and the friend said, talk to my IT person. So she talked to them. And we're like, what?
Yeah, did your client say, I got to ask my computer guy about this?
Yeah, exactly. I would talk to my computer guy. I'm like, who the am I? She talked to this computer guy, bona fide computer guy. He figured out the bit of information that we didn't have at the time, which one of the Microsoft support people revealed to her was what the recovery address actually was, because they don't show you the recovery address, right? When you're trying to actually recover the account, they show you part of it, the obscure.
Yeah, gets obfuscated, yeah.
Yeah, so that was a key bit of info because we wouldn't have, I said to myself, how did like the three of us, me and Tim and Jerry, all miss this? This address was wrong. And she said, well, Microsoft told me what the address was. And I said, okay, that makes sense because could have sworn like one of us would have caught this at the time, The Microsoft support experience was so poor. And I said to her, well, that's more the exception because in general, they've been very good. Usually we log in as an admin and we recover the account. She's a residential user. We didn't have a separate admin account on there. This was set up a long time ago. We didn't have that in this case. I think that was the difference. But in normal cases, we log in as the admin and we initiate the support request, and they've been very good with support. But she was kind of fishing, is this the best provider? So I'm kind of curious why you made that decision, Jerry, not to go to, just the standard kind of recommendation of Microsoft for email hosting in this case.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, Joe, because there are some downsides to using Fastmail, and I'm actually in the middle of it right now. With Bluehost that I told you that we're going to use for the WordPress hosting, they offered first-year domain for free. That was part of the buy-in on that, and that seemed very reasonable. When you configure the MX record, the DNS is perfect, so there's no problem with the DNS. Right now, Fastmail is so vigilant with trying to prevent spammers. Currently, if we send out from the domain, the recipients aren't receiving it. So I've onboarded this afternoon, and the mail's not bouncing back within Fastmail, sending out from the new domain, but I'm doing test emails to myself. So I've opened up a support ticket because Fastmail does not have online chat, and there's no phone support. So it's all through a ticketing system. You'd probably be worse off with this particular client that you mentioned if, in fact, they were with Fastmail.
Interesting.
Because of that very reason. I went into this with knowing that, if in fact, we did need to reach out to them. It's all ticketing support, knowing that once this account is set, it's not like there's going to be additional employees added. There's not a big ask here. It's just we want email that we're paying for that's representative of a business rather than using some bogus sbcglobal.net address. So this is a much better option. If I needed to suggest something else where you could call up, my go-to company in years past had been Rackspace. They do hosted exchange pretty well, but they're still struggling with two-factor authentication. It still doesn't exist in their system.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah, and we talked about that in another show, how that was a non-starter. So maybe some listeners out there have another $5 a month suggestion for, calendar address and email where you can, talk to a live person if in fact you. Because that was a good thing about Rackspace is you get somebody based in the U.S. on the phone, and you might have to wait for a little while on the phone, but you get somebody who knows what they're talking about.
I think I'm still going Microsoft typically. It's just my go-to. Because again, support has been good. This should not have been set up in this way where she was the only admin and her password was, presumably her password was compromised. And just to kind of finish the story, the issue was that she wasn't getting the recovery emails because the address was her same Gmail address, but with one extra letter in it in the middle of the address. It was very strange. Her solution, which the other IT guy figured out, which was a little bit insulting to me, but I got over it. The
computer guy, you mean?
Her computer guy figured out, yes. Well, okay, now we know what the recovery address was. Let's just create that address as a Gmail address, which apparently didn't exist. So I'm like, how did some scammer change the recovery address to one that doesn't actually exist? And the only thing I could come up with, because of course Microsoft should confirm that even if we made a mistake years ago when we set this up or she made a mistake in changing it, it shouldn't let you make a mistake because they confirmed the recovery address for obvious reasons. Like you have to receive an email to that address to actually add it as your recovery email address. So
right, or a code.
You'd think, right? So like the only thing I could come up with was that the scammer fished her password somehow or otherwise got her password, got into her account, changed her recovery email to this new Gmail address that the scammer created, and then Google, being really good at detecting spammy and scammy behavior, canceled, deleted, whatever, that account, even though it had already been confirmed as her recovery account by that point. So by the time her actual computer guy came into the mix and helped her with this, the address no longer existed, and she was able to recreate it, thereby received the recovery email to that recovery address. So it's still a bit of a mystery. Like, I'm really not sure if that's even possible, if that could have, that's the only thing I could imagine.
Something's a little weird on that story.
Yeah. But, again, if you have an admin account that like you manage as the consultant, you just go to Microsoft for support through that admin account. And better yet, if your client is locked down as far as they're not an admin or they have a separate admin that they can use, that it's not their everyday account, that's much more secure. Support is much more accessible from Microsoft. So I do think that they're still my go-to for, hosted email.
Sounds a little sketchy with the Google part being created and then potentially, removed by Google. I would almost think that there'd be a timeline where that account couldn't be recreated as a protection mechanism on Google's end too. So it's overall sounds very fishy, It
doesn't make sense. Yeah. Everything she described is, at least it checks out like why she wasn't receiving the recovery emails, but I just can't make sense of that layer to it that like, bright idea. Let's just create the recovery address that didn't previously exist. It was lucky, I told her, that Microsoft actually gave her that recovery address, because I don't think they usually give that out over the phone. They don't give it out online. So I don't know why they would give it to you on the phone, but
you should ask her computer guy.
Yeah, he sounds like a smart guy. Maybe I should hire him.
Computer person.
Yeah.
I do have something to talk about that's in the line of, we'll call it quote unquote hacking. And this actually happened to someone close in my family. I recently received a phone call from them. They were hacked. Rather than the typical thing where people think they are and think something went wrong and it's actually not that big of a deal, it was just a fake email or something like that, was in fact attacked by a scammer who got so far as to withdraw funds from the account.
Wow.
Now, this is not a company, right? So the company could have insurance in place for something like this, even though you might not recover all the funds. When it happens to someone on a personal level, the banks have ways of dealing with this too, if you can prove fraud, but still, you're not exactly guaranteed that you'll get your money back. It's the type of situation that this person is near and dear to my heart. I can't believe that people fall for this, even though it's the play on fear. So a bunch of phone calls that come in from the scammer trying to say, Amazon's charging all this money to your account. We need to get in here and fix this for you, blah, blah, blah. Someone kept saying, don't answer their calls, ignore them, ignore them, ignore them. Didn't want to call me because I'm too busy, apparently. That made me feel bad about that. I would have easily helped. Finally, one day, I better deal with this. And not only did she call back, they went through the whole process of saying, install this on your computer, which we all know where that's going to go. They went down this road. She installed whatever they asked her to install. They had her make sure to sign into a bank account. The story does not have an ending yet. The current state of affairs is that they removed all her funds from savings.
Wow.
Crazy, right?
We've seen on YouTube where the scammer, once they have access to the computer, they can fake what the HTML of what the person's seeing on the screen. So in truth, it looks like they're adding the funds back, where instead they're draining the bank account.
Exactly. I still don't know the full details of what happened there, but we've had to keep some communications for evidence, the tool that they've used. She spent time with the bank, a number of hours dealing with filing paperwork on the fraud, and she's hopeful. I'm not, that the money will come back in. When I had identity theft occur to me a number of years ago, one of them was with American Express, and they dealt with it swiftly, saw the funds, they saw I wasn't in that country and easily dealt with it. But this is something where the user is actively letting that person in. So I think there's some level of responsibility at times with that. So I'm a little concerned that this won't come back to them, but we'll have to see. I'm beside myself that someone I know very well could fall for something like that. Calling that person back, that's the key. I'm like, if anyone says they're from the bank or they're from this, don't call them back. Look up the number on your credit card, look up the number on the back of your ATM card and call that number.
Right.
Always, no matter what. And this happened to my neighbor over COVID. I told a funny story where that happened. He came over to my lawn and started putting his phone to my ear, and the person was talking to them. But this seems to happen in people in my proximity. It's really disheartening. I have the computer, by the way. I'm making an offline backup, and then I'm going to wipe it, but we need to keep the backup for evidence. Really sad to see this happen.
Just about all banks now are FDIC insured, and the only time that doesn't apply is if it was like a credit union, Sikorsky Aircraft Credit Unit or something like that. That's not FDI insured, or it's a state bank. Usually FDIC will kick in. When you make that copy, by the way, Sam, I don't know anything about this, but I believe you need to make a readable only bit-by-bit copy. A forensic copy. There's a special software that does that. I don't know what it is, but maybe somebody who's listening can reach out to you and provide that information. But I think there's some specific parameters that you need to do to document what happened.
Yeah, I've had other clients ask me about a forensic backup, this kind of thing, or like forensic copies and stuff. And that's kind of a red flag for me. Like, I don't want to be involved. Ideally, of course, you're dealing with a family member and therefore of course you're going to be involved. Where people have said, can you do this kind of thing? They usually use that term, a forensic backup. I think it's just what you said, Jerry. I think it's like a block copy that's read only, so they know it hasn't been tampered with. Yeah.
That's a good call out, though. I haven't done the backup yet. I'm not going to touch it because I have a week where I will be away, but I don't even want to touch it yet until I get some information from them and gather that. Based on the conversation that I heard and how they authenticated her, I think the bank really did call her back after the day she went in for the fraud report. And they were calling to verify some stuff and talk more about it. And she's so scarred now from that. The bank called, she said, I don't know, they verified my number automatically and my name was tied to this. And then the woman came on and said a few things and wanted me to verify information. I told them, don't ever call me back. And I hung up on them. And I was like, I think that might have been the bank. I think they're the ones actually calling this time. I'd rather her take that approach of like, I don't trust anybody now rather than just let's do this again.
Yeah, you don't know, of course.
Right, right. I found that little part amusing.
Well,
maybe Joe's client's computer guy could help you out with this.
Yeah. It's interesting. I've heard that from family too. No, you're so busy and like they don't want to bother us, but I wish you would have bothered me, even if it's not a bother, even if it was a bother.
Yeah.
I wish you would have asked me. But clients forward us the silliest scams, like the most obvious things sometimes. And they say, this looks fake. I just wanted to check with you. And you think it's fake? Really? Like, what tipped you off? Was it any of these 10 items in the first like page of, but like, anyway, so I always thank them. I always say, yes, this is fake. Best to delete it. Thanks for checking. I always thank them because I actually want them to check. I don't want them to like assume. I don't want to bother anybody. Let me just take a guess and respond to this, or maybe ignore something that should be responded to, which happens every once in a while when they email us something about like renewing their Dropbox or renewing their Microsoft account. And it is real. It's good on both sides for them to actually just check with us. I feel like that's the best thing people can do is just forward us the email, because it's just really hard for people to tell. I don't know what advice to give someone that's going through that. You're getting a bunch of calls. They seem very urgent. Somebody's saying there's a problem. You might lose money. You might lose your email. You might lose this or that. There's a general sense of like uncertainty, on the side of the person who's being scammed. They're not comfortable. They're feeling something's not right. It's because they're being attacked, but they don't really necessarily know that. They think eventually I better just do something about this. Let me just respond. That's where it goes wrong.
Right. They're beaten into submission there because she ignored it for a number of days. And then they know what they're doing, right? Yeah. Because they're continuing the onslaught, even though that person has not replied or, said, sure, help me out. They're continuing that onslaught. I mean, they're pinpointing a target audience that they know will be susceptible to fear in this sense. Eventually, it'll get to somebody, especially someone that's not very technical. Finally say, I need to do something about this, as you said. And that's where the downfall occurs. On the client side, you're right. I'd rather have them email me, even though it gets a little annoying sometimes. Yeah. I'm like, come on, man, you can see this. But at the same time, like, yep, thank you. That is not real. Appreciate you sending that on.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I was thinking there's, maybe there's a business. I feel like half my job is evaluating scams, when people send them. It's maybe 1%, not 50%. The business idea would actually just be like a website, and it's probably out there, scamdetector.com or something. It's like, just forward the email there. This website will spit back a response. Yeah, we've seen this 100 times today. Definite scam.
It'll probably catch 99% of them because they'll say they're from Amazon, but they're actually from, Jerry's car service at gmail.com. Right. And it just matches, sees that two mismatch. It's like, yep, this is scam.
Yeah. There's lots of ways that like a service could potentially detect it. The other funny thing is people will forward me a thing. This looks like a scam. I'll write back, yep, looks like a scam. And then my email to them bounces because I just included the whole original email, So I'll like resend my response with just like the first line of their email to me without the original message below it. And my email will go through. So like Google's doing something right, either, on their side or my side or whatever, filtering that stuff out. So, that's the other clue is like if you forward the email that you think might be a scam to, scamdetector.com, which I just made up. Maybe it exists. I don't know. And,
sure
and it bounces. It's like, well, there's a clue right there. But, it's interesting, Sam, you're bringing up this topic of on the personal level, someone being scammed, because we were recently talking about this. And I had this idea that like this would be maybe good content for TidBITS Content Network. And I reached out to Adam Engst, and there's some chatter in our channel on Slack about these stories. And so, for example, like Tim Pearson shared a company was ransomed. It's a business. So they called their insurance company and the FBI. And right on the spot, the insurance company said, pay the ransom. Just pay. Get your files back. And the reason being that it was actually going to cost a lot more. And the ransom was $300,000. Now that's to a business. And I'm sure that the ransom is set based on somebody's assessment of like what the business could potentially afford. It's very interesting that the insurance company advised them to actually just pay the ransom. The twist here, and maybe you'll hear more about this in a future tidbits, the FBI got involved and said, actually, we have the encryption keys for this, the decryption keys, don't pay anything. Apparently, the FBI had already figured out, I don't know if they brute forced this stuff or cracked this particular ransomware.
Yeah, if they have the hash. Sometimes
Yeah.
if they've seen it repeated across a number of victims, their forensic team inside will come up with a hash that actually decrypts it. They'll find that if they have a match, you don't even have to pay the ransom, like Tim's story.
You're oftentimes covered by insurance. And so you don't want to let the business owner know that. It's not a guarantee. And you still don't want them to go through this. Tim's story, the client was down for 2 days. I mean, that could represent a lot of missing money that you're not going to get back necessarily after a thing like this. So you don't want to just rely on insurance, but it also doesn't cover you if you're not a big enough business to have that kind of insurance that would cover you. And not only that, but actually Tim also discussed on a recent patron-only episode about how insurance companies are now starting to require certain things like affidavit to verify that you enforce MFA across all your accounts, for example, things like that. So the insurance companies are also requiring you to comply with certain rules if they're going to actually insure you against this kind of thing happening. So It's not a guarantee. So that's just one story. And I think that it'd be good to hear from listeners too, with any other stories of clients, friends of friends or whatever, who've had this kind of thing happen, because I think sharing these stories, the way I put it was, I think people like respond to fear, just like Sam's example, being motivated to actually respond to the scammer because of fear. But, we can use fear on our side to motivate people to actually do the right thing and protect themselves, hopefully. The way Adam put it was that people respond better to narrative than nagging. So I think that's a good way to put it. Like if you hear enough stories of someone like you, as he put it, equally uninteresting. I'm like a random guy. Nobody's going to attack me. Well, apparently that happens to random people too, or businesses that are in a similar industry. Maybe they're a print shop and they can't print anything for 5 days before this problem is solved. Well, if you're in a print business and you can imagine that happening to you, like it happened to another colleague or competitor or whatever, maybe you will do something about it. So I'd love to hear more stories, just a variety of stories where this has happened to people.
Circling back to the FBI having the hash, of course, if it was near the holidays, it would be who hash that they would have to decrypt the ransom.
I'm glad you circled back to that. That's good.
I don't have any information, any documentation to back this up, but from what I've heard, the FBI will not get involved if it's less than $100,000. A lot of these scammers, they go for the lower numbers for that very reason. So in Tim Pearson's example, it was 300,000, and that brings in the FBI, but they will not consider the case for less than 100,000. So that's also something to think about.
It's interesting. That's my policy for new clients also. Well, we're talking about motivating people with fear, uncertainty, and doubt, and how sometimes it doesn't necessarily work for certain clients. And I don't know. I feel like oftentimes in IT, we kind of have this adversarial relationship with our clients, trying to like force them into compliance with certain policies and things. And I just think it's important to take into consideration the people that you're supporting. This is a website that's put out by one of our supporters, collide.com/CCP. What I want to direct your attention to is honest.security. So this is where they describe their whole approach, which I think is really important in the industry, and I'm glad it's getting some recognition. Talk about their humanistic approach to IT device management and cybersecurity. So I think the key thing there is humanistic. A lot of times we forget that there are humans, on the other side of the screen. And those are the people that we're trying to support. Technology is one thing, like we can, flip a switch on or off, and we can enforce certain policies and things, and we can have certain policy directives come down from, management. But we're also navigating how those things intersect with individual people. It's really informative to read their 5 tenets of honest security, honest.security, and read their 5 tenets. Quick read. I think it applies to a lot of situations, and it's just kind of a good thing to keep in mind as we're thinking about security.
Jerry does his voices of customers of all kinds.
Am I on the cloud?
Joe spins